I do the adult programming here at the library. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the stuff that's coming up, because we have some exciting stuff tonight and stuff that's coming up. So we do a Jerry Fit class. It is a senior fitness class. We can sit in chairs. There's a little bit of standing up, but it's all based on what your needs are. We use weights. Or we don't use weights, depending on what your needs are. But we have a Jerry Fit class every Monday and Friday at 1:00 p.m. If anyone's interested, let me know. You don't have to be a senior also. We are opening it up to any age, that someone that just wants to get a little stronger. Okay. We have a book discussion every month, and this April, it's going to be April soon. So in April, we are doing The Book Collectors by Delphine Monnier. And this is a nonfiction book. We do all sorts of different types of books in our book discussion. This is a nonfiction book based on Daraa, which is a suburb of Damascus. And Daraa was attacked by Assad, the Assad regime, during the Syrian civil war. It was completely destroyed, but people were still living there in the basements and stuff. And eventually those people found books, and they put a library in a basement. And so that's what they had left, basically, was hope within those books that they had. So that's the book that we're going to be reading and discussing April 7th. We might have a copy. If you're still interested to read it quickly this weekend, let me know. We can get you a copy of that book. April 12th at 2:00, we have another author coming in. This is a Christian author, Jocelyn Green, and she does a lot of fiction books too, but they're historical fiction, a lot like Anne here, and so she has to do a lot of research on different topics. This last book that she did was The Metropolitan Affair, set in the 1920s jazz era, and during that time, King Tut's tomb was discovered. And so everyone went gaga over ancient Egypt. So she's going to talk about Egyptomania, unraveling America's jazz age craze for ancient Egypt. So that's April 12th at 2:00 p.m. We are having a seed swap here, if you've ever heard of those. That's April 14th at 6:00 p.m. We're going to have a couple of master gardeners from the Iowa State Extension Office. That's where they're based out of. But all you have to do is bring in a packet of heirloom seeds, and you'll leave with a variety of seeds to take home. So we are doing that April 14th at 6:00 p.m. If you want any information on any of the seeds that you're going to be given, talk to the master gardeners. We are also having an art project in April 21st at 6:00 p.m. We are doing balloon smash art. This is a lot of fun. I've been kind of experimenting with it, but we're going to have it on canvas. We're going to have flow paint, different colors, and we're going to take balloons and smash different designs into the canvas. I have zero art skills whatsoever, and I like the different flow and the different colors that come out with it, so anyone can be an artist with this type of technique. You do have to sign up for that. This is for adults, and you do have to sign up for that. That's April 21st at 6 p.m.
Okay, we'll let these folks go through.
Go on through. Hi. You really have to wait on that. Oh, no. Okay, guys. If you are good, we'll do some whiskey tasting at the end. If you're good. So right now we have Hanigan Kotz here, and she has written many, many books. I think this is your fourth.
This is technically the third book published. The fourth one comes out this fall.
Yes, we had her here last year. Our book club read her first book, and she was here and she spoke on that, and we are so happy to have her here again. She's going to talk about Iowa's Prohibition legacy, and here's Anne.
Thank you. Well, first, Thank you to the library for hosting me once again. And thank you, all of you fine folks, for coming out in a bit of a drizzly day, a bit of a cold day, so it's not the warmest, but I appreciate the fact that you came out. So let me tell you a little bit about myself. I'm originally from Denison, Crawford County. Close to Carroll. Yep. And I became a high school English teacher, and I taught high school English for 33 years. 30 of them were at Waukee High School, which is one of the Des Moines metro suburbs. And that's kind of how I got into the idea of wanting to write a book. And so Caroline was my first book, and I used my mother's family that immigrated from Norway as inspiration for that book. Mom told me some stories, and it's fiction, but I wove some of those stories into the fictional story. And when my readers got done with it, they said, we want more. What else happens? Keep going with this. And so I wrote Sons and Daughters, and that actually is Caroline with her children. I wrote Sons and Daughters. Caroline goes from about 1883 to 1905. A lot about farming. They settled into the Les Hills and farmed those god-awful hills. And then Sons and Daughters picks up right where Caroline leaves off. Like literally, she's walking home, it picks up, she's walking home. And it goes from 1905 to 1933. So you had the pandemic, the Spanish flu, suffrage, World War I, Prohibition, the Great Depression. So I did a lot of research to find out what those things look like in Iowa, and I wove them into the different children's stories. So it's about a family who tries to save their farm and save their heritage along with it. So there is a third book that's coming out this fall, so it'll finish the trilogy, and I'll show you the cover at the very end. But even though I had the third book written, I wanted to put out Moonshine by Moonlight. I had a lot of people who told me, well, I want to read that. I want to read that. And I thought, okay, it's a good way to pick up some readers. I got interested in moonshining because being from Crawford County, I knew all about the bootlegging that went on in Carroll County. My dad loved the stories. My parents had a friend whose father was one of the bootleggers in Carroll County. So it was just always something that was around me, something, and I like to research things that happen, especially when people don't follow the law. That always kind of interests me. And so I started this with the idea that I was going to take a character out of Sons and Daughters. His name is Frank Hogan, and he's from Dunlap, Iowa. Hogan, Irish name, like my Irish Hanigan name. And I thought I wanted to write a book about how Frank Hogan became a bootlegger. And once I get an idea for a story, then I start my research. And I probably research as long as I write. There's a lot that goes into finding what I need for those books, and I thought, well, I'm definitely going to set it in Carroll County. I like to set books in Western Iowa. It's where I'm from, it's what I know, and not a lot of books come over this direction. You don't see a lot of people who get a big interest in the folks over here, all of us. So I thought, well, I'm going to set it in Carroll County, and if I'm going to set it in Carroll County, then I need to go to where the moonshine was made. And I went to Templeton, and I'm sure most of you have heard of Templeton Rye Whiskey. We're going to try it tonight. And I had someone who knew Keith Kirchhoff. I don't know if you're familiar with the Kirchhoff name. Keith Kirchhoff's grandfather was one of the bootleggers in Carroll County. Keith is one of the founders of Templeton Rye Distillery. And I'll give a plug for the distillery because it's a fantastic place to go. They have a great tour, they had juice samples, it's a beautiful facility. And so I spent quite a bit of time with Keith, and Keith told me his stories, he explained things to me. And so when I was talking to Keith, all of a sudden I started to think about, I don't think this is a story about how a guy became a bootlegger. This is a story about how a whole county defied Prohibition. That was the interest. And so then I next talked to another gentleman. His name is Heath Schneider. Heath is from Denison. He graduated the year below me. And Heath's grandmother was a bootlegger. And He is majority owner of Iowa Legendary Rye Distillery now, which is in Carroll. So both of those distilleries are out of Carroll County. And then I did newspaper articles. I read a nonfiction book called Gentlemen Bootleggers, which is also about Carroll County bootlegging. And so my story is fictionalized, but how they did it, why they did it, where they did it, and then the characters are loosely based on some of the people who were in Carroll County at the time. I've been to Carroll Library, done the program for them. Word's gotten back to me that as they've read the book, they're trying to figure out whose farm I'm talking about. And I'm like, no. I wasn't over there when I was like 2 miles south of town, and they're like, oh, I bet you it's so-and-so. So here's how we're going to do this tonight. I'm going to start by pouring the first whiskey. So we're going to do Templeton Rye, just so you taste one of the whiskeys out of Carroll County. Templeton Rye whiskey is not the original recipe. In the 1920s, they made it with sugar. And they did that because it was faster. Otherwise, you have to let the grain ferment. And they were selling it faster than that. So Templeton Rye has the story, but it is definitely not the whiskey itself. So first I'm going to apologize if I dribble whiskey on you. You might smell a little bad when you come out of here, but all right, who's got glasses? There. So Keith Kirchhoff no longer owns Templeton Rye Distillery or his partners. I think there were 3 of them that started the distillery. It now belongs to a large liquor company. I hear people will say to me, well, you know, they don't make it there. And my answer to that is, yeah, they do. If you go over there, you can see that they make it. They do now, right. They moved it. I'm going to go down easy. I can see that. You don't want me to run out. So, yeah, when the liquor company bought it, they moved it out of Iowa, and they were making it out of outside of the state. And I don't know all the details, but they ended up moving it back in. So, yes, this is made in Iowa. Yeah, you gotta hold your little glasses up for me, so I don't miss you. And if you're thinking, I didn't get a glass, well then let me know, and I will give you one.
I didn't get a glass.
I'm going to go get it.
There's always a naughty one in that.
We filled it all right.
Okay. Which story?
Oops, pardon me.
Yeah. So you can sip on the whiskey. If you don't like it, I don't have a spit bucket, so either you're going to have to down it, or you're going to have to give it to a friend who will drink it for you. But there's no backsies on this.
Is this sipping whiskey?
I think so. Yeah. All right, just like at the concerts, coming through. Oh, I think we're out. I think we're out now. All right, everybody good? Good? Okay, so let's start. When we get to the Volstead Act, I will pour the second whiskey and explain the second whiskey to you. So you've got until the Volstead Act before you need to get it down. Okay? Are we good?
Before the
And then we will pour the third whiskey at the very end. So that'll give you time to savor a little bit. So let me get into Prohibition for you. Mother's in the kitchen washing out the jugs, sister's in the pantry bottling the suds, father's in the cellar mixing up the hops, Johnny's on the front porch watching for the cops. Well, it was a family business. Yeah, this is cute and everything, but it actually does tell you that it was involved. So I will talk about one of the ways that the kids were involved a little later. With any kind of issue, there are always different sides to it. So you had, obviously, the dries. Very much no alcohol for any reason. It was a religious thing for them. Protestants Protestants were dries. Not all Protestants were dries, but the dries were Protestants. Opposite to them, you had the wets. The wets did not want just free for all, okay? They thought that we probably should regulate the saloons. And they also had this bright idea that if you tax liquor, it might be revenue for the state. They were worried that prohibition would increase crime. Who's smart, huh? Then you had the moderates who just wanted to regulate the manufacture, sale, and consumption of whiskey, and it was because they were concerned for public safety. Not all whiskey was safe. Not all things that were going on that were revolving around whiskey were safe. So now I'm going to talk to you about the history of Iowa's prohibition. And you can move if you can't see. Okay. So Iowa became a state in 1846. Kind of keep that in mind, 1846. 1851, the state of Iowa prohibited dram shops. Those were bars. So that was the beginning. 1855, those nasty Whigs were in power, and they went with complete prohibition. So 1855 was the first time Iowa went dry. In 1858, the Iowa legislature came back and they amended that, and they allowed beer and wine. If you think about the immigrants who make up the bulk of this state, there are two large immigrant populations. Who are they? Germans? Irish. Oh, God bless you for the Norwegian. I appreciate it. Those Norwegians don't drink. Yeah, you have the Germans and you have the Irish. And so you can see why they were like, hey, whoa, we need to fix this. In 1882, the legislature came back again and said, yeah, we're going to go with complete prohibition. In order to do that, they have to write a resolution. They pass it, House and Senate, the governor signs it. But in the state of Iowa at that time, the law said that you had to pass it twice. You had to pass the law twice for it to become permanent. So in 1883, they wrote a resolution again. They added a few more things to the resolution that they had forgotten the first time around. Passed it, House and Senate, governor signed it. The Wets said, this is an illegal law. And they took it all the way to the Supreme Court, the U.S. Supreme Court. And the U.S. Supreme Court said, you're right, it is. It's an illegal law. It was illegal because the state of Iowa said if you have to have identical law. So the resolution that they changed the second time was like, no, no, no. So we came back out of prohibition and whoop, whoop, we were drinking again. In 1893, they passed the Moldt Law, which gave local option for counties. So some counties dry, some counties wet. Carroll County?
Not so dry.
Not so dry. Carroll County never once voted for prohibition. And then in 1916, Iowa went back with complete prohibition. We were one of 3 states that went with complete prohibition prior to the federal law. The other 2 states were Ohio and Maine. And I'll come back on all of this. I just want to give you an overview. And then as we all studied in our American history class, they passed the law in 1919. And then it became law on January 1, 1920. We did not come back out of prohibition again until 1933. So Iowa had prohibition from 1916 to 1933. So I want to get into some of the people who were involved in bringing prohibition to the state of Iowa for all, various times. So let's start with Orlando Manning. He actually was originally from Indiana, son of a Methodist minister. By the time he was 21 years old, he had landed in Carroll, Iowa, and he was a practicing lawyer. He then became our state representative for the Republican Party. He became our lieutenant governor. In 1883, that second year of Prohibition, he gave a rousing speech on temperance during the Republican State Convention. Manning, Iowa is named after him, and Manning, Iowa sits in Carroll County. Manning, Iowa also had the longest bar west of the Mississippi for a long time. I was down in Manning last fall, and I asked them if they thought their name was or town was appropriately named. Surprisingly, they said, "Oh, we thought it was after a railroad guy." I'm like, "No, it's this guy."
It's all a cover-up.
The Women's Christian Temperance, remember they called it temperance in the day, they were a big part of Iowa's prohibition laws. The national and the Iowa WCTU was started in the same year in 1874. Annie Wittenmeyer from Keokuk was the first national president of the WCTU, and she also, if you look in the history of suffrage, she also is a big name in suffrage. Women wanted the right to vote because of issues, and temperance was one of them. They wanted to shut alcohol down, and they needed the right to vote to help make that happen. Their watchwords were agitate, educate, organize. They wore white ribbon on their lapel so everybody knew what they believed in. And their motto, drink water instead of alcohol. It wasn't very sexy and it wasn't very convincing. Another one who you would have heard of maybe is Ida B. Wise. She originally was from Philadelphia, but her stepfather, a temperance reformer, brought the family to Hamburg, Iowa. Ida was teaching Sunday school by the age of 12. Her favorite topic for her children, temperance. She joined the WCTU. She was Iowa's president. She was the national president. She also was one of very few ordained ministers as a woman. Interestingly, a little side note here, cigarettes were also outlawed in Iowa between 1896 and 1921. So there was a time that you couldn't drink and you couldn't smoke. No fun. No. Okay, Myrtle Cook, probably haven't heard of before. She was president of Vinton's WCTU. She was also leader of Benton County Ku Klux Klan's women's organization. Now, let me take a sidetrack for you. If you did not know, the Klan rose in the 20s, including Iowa. There were a lot of towns that had Klan organizations. And when I read that, I thought, okay, wait a minute. We don't have a tremendous number of people of color in the state of Iowa, especially back in the 20s. Well, this was right after World War I. Who did we fight in World War I? Germans. So they hated Germans. They hated Catholics. They hated Jews. We got those. So yeah, and the Klan really put themselves out there as vigilantes. They were good Americans who wanted to make people follow the law. And they hated bootleggers. Well, anyway, back to Myrtle Cook. So she hated bootleggers. And so she made a list of all the suspected bootleggers in Benton County, and she had it published in the paper. They weren't real happy with her. She was in her kitchen at night, and a shot rang out, and a bullet came through her kitchen window, struck her dead. She fell to her kitchen floor.
Oh, my.
September 7th, 1925. So, yeah, you had some bootleggers who were serious about making their business. The next two, you have Senator Brookhart. We'll start with him. He graduated from Bloomfield High School. He got a law degree. He was by the way, the Republican Party was the party of Prohibition. And so he ran on the Prohibition platform, which was very popular. And he made it to Washington, D.C., represented Iowa. When he was in Washington, D.C., he really liked to brag about the fact that there was no liquor in Iowa in the 1920s. And they really didn't like Senator Brookhart. He also discovered that a lot of them that ran on the Prohibition platform had whiskey in their desk. So I ran across a song that was made up about Senator Brookhart, and the gist of it is that he is naive and stupid, because he's the only Iowan who didn't know that Iowa was a big bootlegging state. Well, he killed his own political career because at that time they had a $7.1 million budget for the Prohibition law. He proposed a $240 million budget. And whack, that was the end of Senator Brookhart. The second gentleman, John Brown Hammond, if you know your history, maybe you know about John Brown, not from Iowa, who was anti-slavery. This is one of his relatives. John Brown Hammond was a coal miner in Centerville, but he was very passionate about Prohibition. When he was in Centerville, he saw a group of men meeting in the hotel across the street from him. For whatever reason, decided that he was going to go confront them on his own. And he chastised them. They were brewery owners. And so he wanted to give them the what for on making liquor. In 1908, he moved to Des Moines, and he became the Des Moines Chief of Police. And he is credited with drafting 95% of Iowa's liquor and moral behavior laws. Not only was he against whiskey, but he was against prostitution. Iowa cities had prostitution areas. Sioux City had one, Des Moines had one, Waterloo, Cedar Falls. So John Brown Hammond wasn't very happy when the 18th Amendment was repealed. He died in 1940. He was living in a nursing home, and from his nursing home bed, he was working on the 18th Amendment Rescue Association. He was still trying to bring Prohibition back. So those are some of the people who were kind of instrumental in bringing about Prohibition to Iowa. Let's turn to Iowa saloons. So in 1906, we had 1,770 saloons in Iowa. I'm curious what the number is today of bars, but I bet it's more than that. If you look at the alcohol consumption, in 1911 it was 22.81 gallons. That's per capita. That's every head in Iowa.
Oh my gosh.
Which tells you people were drinking a whole lot more than 22 gallons of alcohol. Now, in this time period, I'm talking about beer. That's what pretty much they were drinking in the 1880s into the early 1900s. They drank beer because the water was poisonous in Iowa. So they drank beer instead. They gave it to their kids. The brewery owners operated the saloons. It was the way that they sold their beer. So they offered the working men free salty lunches. So they would go in, free lunch, and they would drink their beer over their lunch and then go back to work. And if you couldn't get to the saloon, that's no problem. They hired little boys with buckets, and they would fill the bucket with beer, and they would take it for you. So men drank over lunch. Well, the saloons obviously were for men only. They were loud, they cursed, they were kind of crude. It was sort of the social club for men. Oftentimes it was a meeting place for unions, for baptisms, veteran groups, fraternal groups. Oh yeah, it's the Catholics that baptized. Parties. It was baptism parties in the saloon. Sure it was. But it definitely was a refuge from their wife and family. But the darker side of those saloons, men came with their pay envelopes and they drank them away. And they had no money to feed their families. There was a lot of spousal abuse and child abuse from drunk men coming home from the saloons. You can see why the WCTU wanted to get rid of alcohol. So going into Iowa, talk about Iowa breweries a little bit. Prior to World War I, there were 1,000 breweries in the United States. You drank beer from your local brewery because there was no refrigeration. So there was a lot of breweries. By 1878, Iowa had 130 breweries. They gave steady employment to the men. They bought grain from the local farmers in order to make their product. And then after they made the beer, the byproduct they gave back to the farmers to feed their animals. It actually was a pretty good deal to have those breweries. This is the Magnus Brewery in Cedar Rapids. It opened up in 1859. When Prohibition came through, it ruined breweries. A picture that I found of them with their horse and carriage bringing the beer around. They also delivered it to other cities by rail, but again, it had to be within a day. You ever heard of the German Beer Mafia? Mm-hmm. So this is the Iowa City German Beer Mafia. There were 3 breweries in Iowa City. The Union Brewery was owned by Conrad Graff. The City Brewery was owned by John Englert, and the Great Western Brewery was owned by John Dostal. So 3 big breweries in Iowa City. They had caves dug underneath the brewery buildings to keep the beer cold, but they also had a way for the breweries to connect with each other. And so that was interesting because you would think that they would have competed with each other. They did not. There was so much beer being drunk that there was plenty of business for everybody. So in 1884, before the Supreme Court struck down Prohibition, the brewers lost hundreds of thousands of gallons of beer because they didn't have refrigeration. They lost their business. Men lost their jobs. Farmers lost a way to sell their grain. On July 4th of 1884, Conrad Graf had had enough of Prohibition. July 4th, men should be able to celebrate the 4th of July the way God intended. Here. So he went into one of his saloons and he tapped a keg, even though it was against the law. And word got out that beer was being served in this saloon, and you can imagine the rush. Well, there were too many people in the saloon, so the police came in. Not only was too many people, but also illegal alcohol, and they just threw everybody out and they locked the doors. And one of the patrons was furious about that. There was an empty keg outside of the saloon. He picked it up, he threw it through the glass window, and then they climbed through, and they continued to drink. Well, that started the other 2 beer mafia men selling beer as well. And they were cited and they sold beer. And they were cited and they sold beer. Eventually, Iowa City brought them to trial. And this was, hang on, I got ahead of myself here. So they brought them to trial. It was August 14th. And they said, the brewery owner said, we're not having this. We're not going to trial. We'll just get rid of the people who are involved in the trial. So they were going after the people who were going to testify against them. They were going after the people who were going to run the trial. The person that they thought they should go for first, the judge. Because if you don't have a judge, you don't have a trial. So they went ahead and they headed out. The judge lived outside of Iowa City. It was them, some of the guys who worked in the brewery, and then just general supporters of drinking beer. They all, big mob of them, headed out to the judge's house. Their intent was to tar him and hang him. They were met by the city prosecutor who heard that they were headed out to the judge's house, and he thought he was going to stop them. He was kicked, stripped, and tarred. And then they got to the judge's house, and of course, the judge is not coming out. The big group is standing outside of the judge's house, yelling for him to come out, making a racket, and the judge won't come out. His wife came out, and hell hath no fury like an angry woman. She stood on that porch, and she said, "There's an old lady dying in this house," which was true, "and you're being disrespectful. Go home." A lot of them. They did. They slunk off a little bit. But Conrad Graf and 30 of his men decided to wait that judge out. And so eventually, sun went down, judge wasn't coming out, so they went back to Iowa City. While they were going back to Iowa City, 2 brothers, John and L.G. Swafford, who were city attorneys, met them, and they tarred those 2 men. They terrorized Iowa City all night long. And when sun came up, word got out of Iowa City that this had all gone on. Supporters of the beer mafia guys and their men came as far away as Marengo and Ames to support them in Iowa City. And then we went back out of Prohibition again, and they were back to selling beer in their saloons. Dostal's is gone, the building. It was destroyed by fire. Englert's brewery is gone. It was razed to the ground, and another building stand is in its place. But Graf's brewery building is still in Iowa City today. It's on Lynn Street, and the cave is still underneath.
The movie theaters, the Englert,
Is it? Huh. Well, that's eastern Iowa. Let's go to western Iowa, where we're from. Sioux City. I'm sure you know that Sioux City is a rough town, has been for a long time. They refer to it as Little Chicago. Remember, Iowa became a state in 1846. Sioux City did not have a police department until 1885. It was like the Wild West in Sioux City. They did as they pleased. Sioux City had 11 public schools, 18 churches, 75 saloons, 2 breweries, several gambling houses. Prostitution and gambling was on the lower 4th, which 4th Street used to be a really bad street. The red light district in Sioux City was called the Sudan. And there were 2 streams east of the city. One was called the Big Whiskey, and the other was called the Little Whiskey. So in 1882, one of those Prohibition years, the saloons said, no, we're not doing Prohibition. So the saloon owners got together and they decided that they were going to talk to the city officials. So they met with the city officials and they said, we've got a proposition for you. How about we give a contribution to the city every month and you tell the police to leave us alone? And the city officials said, okay. So anywhere from $25 to $100 each one of the saloons paid. And remember, there were 75 saloons. And so Sioux City itself, now, I'm not talking the county, I'm just talking the town, really didn't do Prohibition. In 1886, there were 2 murders that happened in the gambling houses, and both of them involved drunk men. The First Methodist Church minister decided that something needed to be done, that Sioux City was just out of control. He couldn't go to the police. He couldn't go to the city officials. So he reached out to this gentleman by the name of Reverend George Haddock. You ever heard of Haddock? Okay. Haddock was known as the fighting preacher. He was not from Iowa, but he traveled through the Midwest and he hated booze. And so he would go to different places and he would give sermons and he would testify against the saloon owners. And so they did. They brought him to Sioux City, and that's exactly what he did. He went into the churches, up on the pulpits. He gave a lot of different sermons. He was actually starting to get somewhere. He was making people feel like, yeah, okay, maybe we do have a problem. And he testified against the saloon owners. You can imagine how the saloon owners in Sioux City felt about that one. In 1886, it was a dark and stormy night, 10:15. George Haddock was returning home. And he first had to bring his horse and carriage to the livery. When he came out of the livery, across the street were a group of men, a gang of men. And he went to confront them. Words were spoken, fists were thrown, a shot rang out, and George Haddock was killed dead on the street in Sioux City. They rounded up men that they suspected who had been involved in the killing of George Haddock. One of them was John Ahrensdorf, who was put on trial. He was a foreman for one of the local brewery owners. Not one of those men served 1 day in prison. They all got off. So, there you go, Sioux City. Let's go to 1916. So why did Iowa go early with Prohibition in 1916? Well, they made it seem like it was unpatriotic to drink. We were headed into World War I. Men were working in the breweries. They should be fighting. We were using agricultural resources to make liquor that needed to go feed the troops. That's how they got it passed in 1916. Uh-oh, what's that mean? Okay, so this is Iowa Legendary Rye. I'll start in the back this time. Iowa Legendary Rye. This is made in Carroll. Iowa Legendary Rye is the 1920s recipe. So if you want to know what it tasted like, this is it. This is Grandma Lorene's recipe. And the reason, if you look on any of the Iowa Legendary Rye products, it will not use the word whiskey. And that is because the law in the state of Iowa says if you put sugar in whiskey, you legally cannot call it whiskey. That's why. All right, I'm coming. Don't worry over there.
Hey, Bill.
Like I said, it's Grandma Lorene's recipe. She did not do the distilling herself. She had a guy named Wormy. I don't know what Wormy's real name is, but I'm sure his mother would. Wormy's the one who made the whiskey, and Grandma Lorene would bring him sandwiches. And I'm sure Wormy was paid well. You will think these are two very different tasting whiskeys, and they are both rye whiskeys. All right, now we go. Well, there's nobody else in your back row, right?
Over here.
Oh, okay. Hang on, I'm coming to this. I skipped you, my apologies.
Here, I'll come to you.
Okay, here we go. See how it drips? Mm-hmm. Yep. Okay. Front row.
Something to warm up.
No, she didn't get, she came in
It's all right.
I can't forget the directive. What?
Is there any connection heaven? There is no beer. Why are we drinking here? University of Iowa.
I don't know. Okay, so here we go. Everybody got, I didn't miss anybody else, right? All right, so Volstead Act 1919. The first thing that the federal government had to do was figure out how to enforce the law, so they came up with the Prohibition Bureau. Originally, it was in the Treasury Department, and then they moved it to the Justice Department. Originally, they hired 1,500 agents for the entire United States. At its peak, they only had 4,300 agents. They were relying on local law enforcement, which was a bit of a problem. They were paid $150 a month. In today's money, that's $1,700. That's not a lot of money to live on. There was no criteria for employment. Any man walked in off the street could be hired as a prohibition agent. And once they were hired, there was very little training. So because they weren't paid well, because they really didn't scan them very well, prohibition agents, a lot of them, they took bribes or they confiscated the whiskey and they sold it. The first offense for getting caught was up to $1,000 or 6 months in jail. And second time you were caught, it was up to $2,000 or 1 month to 5 years in jail. But those were only maximum penalties. The average was $154.27, and that's because there were no minimum penalties. It was completely up to the judge to decide what it is that you got. The Justice Department spent 44% of their time on prohibition. By 1930, 49% of the prisoners in jail were bootleggers. They were clogging the courts. They were clogging our jails. The judges did not appreciate having to do all of this with bootleggers. Now, remember, this is a federal offense, which means that you have to go to a federal courthouse, which is in Fort Dodge. I read examples of federal judges who decided that they were just going to clear their docket. So they would make a statement. Any of you out there who are here for bootlegging, here's how this is going to go. You say you're guilty, I'll give you a $50 fine, you pay the guy, and out the door you go.
Pretty simple.
So the bootleggers, this is, why did they keep doing it? Because they could make far more money making whiskey and paying fines, or a short stint in jail while their business continued. Probably one of the worst things that happened to them is they confiscated their still. And then they had to go make a new still. Yeah, there wasn't a lot of reason why they wanted to quit what they were doing.
The agents called revenuers?
Revenuers, yes, yes. So I was going kind of towards my book now. I was very interested in why Iowa was such a big bootlegging state. Why Carroll County? So you have to go back a little bit in history prior to this. When we got into World War I, the president asked farmers to ramp up production. We needed to feed the troops. In order to get the farmers to ramp up production, they brought the price of all the ag products up. So they subsidized. And the farmers said, good prices. So they wanted to make more, and in order to do that, they bought land. And in order to farm more land, they bought newer or better equipment, or more of it. To do all of that, they took out loans. So they had a tremendous amount of loans. And then after World War I, we were overproducing, and we didn't need to send it to Europe. We didn't need to feed the troops. So the federal government took the subsidies and yanked them, and the prices fell. And here were all these farmers who had loans with these banks, and they couldn't afford to pay their loans. And so they started to lose their farms. And not only did you lose your farmland, but you lost your house too. So you didn't have a way to feed your kids. You didn't have a place for them to sleep. You can see why they did what they did. Carol, let me show you some farm prices. So I did some research. Iowa only goes back to 1925 on farm prices. But you look, it's 12 cents a bushel in 1933. Yeah, and then we hit into the Depression. So you hear stories about farmers that burned corn for fuel because it wasn't worth anything to them.
Just a little side note on that, the elevator in my hometown, they'd get telegrams of what the price was in Minneapolis. Corn was 2 cents a bushel. Here, corn was 2 cents less. This was 1934.
Yeah. Well, if you look at the national versus Iowa, Iowa's lower. Yeah. So it's kind of a sobering, now you're like, huh, what else are you going to do? What paid the most? Booze. We have been in Prohibition since 1916, so you can imagine by the 1920s. So yeah, let's talk about something a little more fun. So these are all the different names. Moonshine, Mountain Dew, which was in the Appalachian Mountains. White Lightning, you know where that comes from? Iowa. Yep, we coined White Lightning. Why is it called White Lightning? When it comes out of the still, it's clear. It becomes that beautiful color when they age it. So to age whiskey, you have to use a barrel, an oak barrel, and they burn the inside of it, they char it. And then that's why the color comes. Now today, of course, they age whiskey for a lot longer. Back in the 1920s, Heath told me that Grandma Lorraine would look to see when the color of a copper penny. That's what she was looking for, and then she would sell it. But the thing that I didn't understand until Keith explained it to me was, in order to age whiskey, it has to have air around the barrels. So you can't bury them to age them. You've got to have them out. And if you're going to age it for a few months, now how much whiskey do you have when the revenue agents come? So there was a lot, but it was worth more money. So that's why you wanted to age it, because it was worth a lot more money. So if you're going to distill the whiskey, if you decide, yep, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to make whiskey, first thing you had to do was find a place to distill your whiskey. Sometimes they made it outside, in the woods or on the side of their agricultural fields, but you needed water. because whiskey takes a lot of water. So if you didn't have a stream on your property, then you probably couldn't make it outside. They made it in barns. Hog houses and chicken coops were the two favorite places to make whiskey. If you've ever been in a hog house or a chicken coop, they smell god-awful. If you've ever been into a whiskey distillery, smells. So the revenue agents would smell for whiskey. That's why you wanted to make it someplace where it would cover the smell. Sometimes they didn't have an outdoor location, like if you lived in town, so they made it in their attics or their cellars. It was not the best place to make whiskey because you need a lot of ventilation. You get carbon monoxide poisoning if you make it inside without enough ventilation. I ran across a story of a young man, like he was only like 18, 20 years old in Templeton. They found him dead on his cellar steps. Yeah, couldn't get out. Yep. The revenue agents also had a couple other things that they looked for besides the smell. So trees. When you make whiskey, it makes mold on trees. And so they would look at the bark of the trees and see if they were black. The other thing that they might do in the winter, if you lived on a farm and you had all your outbuildings, they would look and see which one didn't have snow on the roof. Because they were so warm from all the fires. Once you make your whiskey then, let me turn it for you. Once you make your whiskey, you need to find a place to hide it. So creeks were a favorite. Put the glass jar down into the water. Corn cribs were used in Carroll County. The old corn cribs. So they would put the whiskey on the inside, and then the outside you would see nothing but the corn. Well, the revenue agents found that one as well. So they would bring long poles with them. And they would take the poles and they shoved it through the corn, and they listened for the crack of glass. It only took 2 ounces for you to be arrested. They had false floors and false walls. I read about one lady who, when she made her whiskey, when she was done, she would put the still down into her well. So she tied a rope to it, and then she'd bring it back up when she needed to make whiskey. And she kept her jars of whiskey in her potato patch. In Templeton, once the whiskey was aged and they wanted to store it, they would dig trenches. And they would put the barrels down into the trenches. And usually they were like front yard. But of course, the revenue agents looked for disturbed dirt. So they put the kids' swing set over the trench. And when the revenue agents came, the kids hopped onto the swing set and they dragged their feet back and forth. And so they would trick them that way. Now you're ready to sell it. So where are you going to sell your whiskey? Dance halls, one of the most popular places to sell whiskey because every town had dances at least once a week or sometimes twice a week. And there was always a guy or two there that you could buy whiskey from. In eastern Iowa, they had something called See the Blind Pig. You ever heard of this before? No, it's an eastern Iowa thing. So you would go and you would pay your $5 or whatever it was to go into a building to go look at a blind pig. And you were given a glass, a cup. And you weren't paying for whiskey. They weren't selling whiskey. You went to go see a blind pig. Sometimes there actually was a pig who was painted, poor pig. Sometimes there was no pig. When I told this in eastern Iowa, a lady in the audience said, "Oh my gosh, we have a bar called the Blind Pig." They also had blind tigers. So it was a door that had a slot in it, and you put money in, and then booze came out. Roadhouses. Before they had motels, you would stay at a roadhouse in a small town, and they sold booze. Mobile taverns. So they would take a hay rack, and they would hook it to a pickup, and then drive it out into the country. And then word got out that there was booze out in the country. So everybody went out to the hay rack and sat on the hay rack and drank. And if the law came, then everybody took off, and the mobile tavern took off as well. So what happened to the saloons during Prohibition? Well, some of them sold soft drinks, and they would put booze in under the counter. Some of them also sold near beer. They had non-alcoholic beer back in that time. And if you had a near beer and you wanted to have the whiskey put into it, I was told by a gentleman in Webster City that it was always White Lightning. White Lightning is like Everclear, it doesn't have any flavor to it, so you could put alcohol back in without ruining the taste of your beer. This is the gravestone that's in Templeton. This is Father Schulte's grave. There are lots of these gravestones across Iowa. This portion of the gravestone is empty inside, and that's so that it's not so heavy. But on the back of this, you go around the back and there is a plaque on it. I think it's Father Schulte's mother, from what I could tell. Anyway, the plaque wasn't attached. You could take it up, put it on, take it off. So you would pay this guy over here, maybe at the pool hall, and then you would go to here and you would reach inside of the gravestone, and there's where your bottle of whiskey would be. And these are all over Iowa cemeteries. This wasn't just Templeton. They also, you could buy beer on your mail route. So you would put money into your mailbox and then go back out and there'd be whiskey in there. If you saw a car with one headlight or no headlights, that was usually a sign that that guy sold whiskey. Iowa also had speakeasies, like everywhere else. So these were some of the ones that I found. The Lighthouse Inn in Cedar Rapids burned down last fall, so it's gone. In my hometown of little old Denison, there was a speakeasy. It was right on Broadway in plain sight. So you would go up these very steep steps, and when you opened the door, there were some guys playing cards. It was a card room, but there was a false wall, and behind the false wall was the speakeasy. It is the old-fashioned bar today. If you end up in Denison and you're looking for a place to sit in it's a really nice bar. I totally recommend the old-fashioned, and they make a great old-fashioned. In case you don't know where Carroll County is, because I have to do this for people in eastern Iowa, because they don't know. If you look south of Carroll County, the county right below it, Audubon County, very much against booze. A lot of Protestants in Audubon County. The Audubon County Sheriff loved to find bootleggers. I saw a picture of him standing like on a lawn, and he has all these stills on their side lined up of all the people that he busted. So I read that, if you were a bootlegger, you needed to know where the county line was. You stayed in Carroll County. You did not allow your still to go over into Audubon County. Remember, sheriffs had to stay within their own counties. So let's go to Carroll County. So this gentleman on the right, Alphonse Kirchhoff, so that's Keith's grandfather. The Kirchhoffs, farming family, obviously, and made illegal liquor. The story that Keith tells is out on the farm, this gentleman came up to the farm. At that time period, there were a lot of people who rode the rails illegally, hobos. So this guy comes onto the Kirchhoff farm, and Mrs. Kirchhoff is outside working. And he says to her, "Ma'am, do you think I could get a cup of coffee?" And she said, "Sure." So she went in the house, she got him the coffee, he drank the coffee. And he said, "You wouldn't happen to have any of that special stuff, would you?" And she said, "Yeah, I think I can help you." They kept a jug of whiskey in a hole in the ground, and it was covered up. And she went over there, and she got the whiskey, she poured it into the coffee cup, and she gave it to him. And he said, "I'm a federal agent." So Alphonse comes rushing over because his wife is going to go to jail. And he said, "It was mine. It's all mine." And he must have spent some time in jail because Keith said that when he was a young boy, Alphonse said to him, "I should have let your grandma take the rap." Well, she was pregnant, and they didn't put pregnant women in jail. Oh. So there's Grandma Lorraine, that you just tried her whiskey. Again, the Sextros, Carroll County, big farm family. And so one night, the federal agents came to the farm, and they were looking for the still, the mash, the whiskey, and they tore that farm apart. Remember, they had false walls, false floor. They tore that farm apart. They found nothing, not one drop, nothing. They had gone to the wrong farm. They were at the neighbor's farm. When the Sextros found out that they had intended to bust them, and they had small children, and they could not go to jail, they decided they were done making whiskey. So they dug a hole on the farm and they put the still down into the hole. And when Heath opened up Iowa Legendary Rye, he wanted to find the still. So he went and he found it, dug it up. So if you go to Carroll, if you go to the distillery, it's sitting right there. You guys have seen it? Yeah, it's kind of cool. The gentleman on the left, Joe Earlbeck. Ever heard of Joe Earlbeck? He is referred to as the Kingpin. So he is 11 months younger than Al Capone, just for your reference. He grew up on a farm near Dedham. His first still was a copper wash boiler. Well, eventually, Joe Earlbeck decided he wanted to expand his enterprise. And so he went to farmers and he said, if you will make whiskey for me, I will give you 50 cents for every gallon you make. That was a pretty good deal. He said the catch to this, though, is if you get caught, that's your still, your whiskey, your mash. You don't mention my name. And he said, I will get you a lawyer. If you have to pay a fine, I will pay it. If you go to jail, I will pay your farm loans while you're in jail. I will feed your wife and kids while you're in jail. When you get out, I will give you a job. You have my word. And they did. So there are no records for an illegal business, but they estimate that he had 40 stills. He was making 1,000 gallons of whiskey a day. Now that wasn't all being drunk in Carroll County or in Iowa. He was sending it all over across state lines. Al Capone was one of his people who bought it. Al Capone loved Templeton rye whiskey. He was the largest bootlegger in the rural Midwest, right out of Templeton. You can imagine that the federal agents would have loved to have put Joe Earlbeck in jail. They tried one way and they tried another. Eventually, they arrested him and they went to Fort Dodge and they summoned a grand jury to try and indict him. And they could not find enough evidence to indict him, and Joe Earlbeck went free. In 1936, 3 years after Prohibition, Joe Earlbeck tried to sell 10 gallons of whiskey to a federal agent.
Ooh.
He was caught with 10 gallons. No doubt about it. So he was going to prison. He went to the prosecutor and he said, I can't go to prison. I'll pay a fine. I can't go to prison. Joe Earlbeck was a likable guy. He was a gentleman, and because he kept his word. And the prosecuting attorney liked him. He went to the judge and he told the judge, this is what Joe Earlbeck said. And Joe Earlbeck said, I will never make another drop of illegal whiskey again. You have my word. They let him off. He did not go to jail. He did not make whiskey again. He opened up a bar, and he had a bar for about 2 years, and then I don't exactly know what happened to him after that. But so there's Joe Earlbeck, the kingpin. I said to you at the beginning, I said to you at the beginning that all of Carroll County was involved in bootlegging. So we know the farmers were involved, and we know why. The grocers were involved. They sold the sugar. So I am told that the train came right through Templeton, and there were train cars full of sugar when it came through. And they would load it all onto the train platform, and that was it. It would just sit there. Nobody did anything with it until night came, and then the bootleggers would come and they would pick up the sugar. The bakers were involved. They sold the yeast. The coffin maker was involved because they used to line coffins with copper, and they used it for their still. Same with the guy who put gutters on your house. They used copper gutters at that time. The Catholic priest in Templeton was involved. He bought the whiskey and he sold it to his priest friends to tell them how good it was. But more importantly, he allowed the bootleggers to age their whiskey in the basement of the church. Because the federal agents were never going to go into a Catholic church. And you can imagine the smell of that church. The car dealers were involved because when these men came with cash in a depressed economy to buy brand new Oldsmobiles, they knew where the money came from. The bankers were involved because they put money into the bank and kept the banks open. The sheriff of Carroll County was involved. He told them when the feds were coming. That's why you kept your still in Carroll County. So he had a system, and they don't remember whether it was hat on or hat off, but he would drive around the county past the farms, and if you saw the sheriff coming, you needed to look and see about that hat. And then you would know feds were on their way, get everything hidden. And so why he did it, I don't know. I mean, was he taking bribes or getting paid off? Possibly. I don't know why he did it, but he did. And that's why there was also so much liquor being made in Carroll County, because they could do it without getting arrested. The biggest raid in Iowa happened in Carroll County. It was June 1922. B.F. Wilson was the head of the Northern District for the regulators. Him and 3 of his federal agents, the Methodist minister from Audubon, the superintendent of Audubon schools, and the Audubon sheriff got together one night, and they made a list of all the suspected bootleggers. And remember, the federal agents could go into any county. The sheriff could not. They issued 38 search warrants for Dedham, Templeton, Manning, Lincoln Township, and Audubon County. And Herman Lang was caught with a 30-gallon still, 400 gallons of mash, 9.5 gallons of whiskey. Max Castle was caught with a 30-gallon still. His was interesting because the still was below ground. And he had a pipe that ran up above ground, and that's how he would feed the water in. They had 19 successful raids. Now, they would have had a lot more, but word got out, and people started to run. They confiscated $50,000 in cash. In today's money, that's $937,000. 2,500 gallons of mash and 125 gallons of whiskey. 22 people were implicated. One of them was a woman. So because alcohol was not legal, it wasn't regulated. And when you have unregulated products, sometimes bad things can come. There were 1,000 deaths in the United States every year of alcohol poisoning. The first people who were affected by Prohibition were the alcoholics, and they were desperate. There were instances that they would go into silos and drink the sludge at the bottom of the silo that was from the rotted feed. They stole antifreeze from car radiators and drank that. They drank hair tonic. There was a toilet water from France that was 76% alcohol. The federal government did not make industrial alcohol illegal because it was poisonous. You drank it, you died. And so they did buy it, and they ran it through their stills trying to take out the poisons, and it didn't always work. It caused paralysis, blindness, poisoning, death. Industrial alcohol, just to give you an idea, it's used as in solvents, it's used in varnish, formaldehyde, pesticides. This was the stuff that they were drinking. And then I ran across that you could distill it yourself. So you just needed to take a piece of white bread, and then you poured the industrial alcohol through the white bread, and that would take all the toxins out. No, people died. This is Jamaican ginger. So Jamaican ginger was a patent medicine. You know, back in the day, medicines were a lot of alcohol. And when people started to buy vast quantities of Jamaican ginger because they didn't feel very well, the owners of Jamaican ginger decided that we've got something here. And they knew why people were buying it, but they wanted to make more money. So they changed the formula of it to make it cheaper to make. And in the process, they also made it poisonous. If you drank enough Jamaican ginger, it gave you something either called Jake leg or Jake foot, paralysis. So you would see these guys walking with like their foot dragging behind them or their leg dragging. It's because they drank a bunch of Jamaican ginger. The bootleggers also did some things to the whiskey, and it had to do with money. Doesn't it always have to do with money? So to make it look like that it had been aged, they added caramel coloring, burnt sugar, or prune juice. Now none of that will hurt you, but you're buying White Lightning and paying for something else. They added creosote. Think about that one. It gave the smokiness of scotch. They added sulfuric acid. So if you had a higher proof on your alcohol, you could charge more money. Well, to tell that you have a high proof, you need a hygrometer. People don't have hygrometers. Or you can shake it, and it'll create beads, bubbles. The longer the beads hold, the higher the proof it is. So when they added sulfuric acid, it would keep the beads for a longer period of time. They also added iodine, because when you drink iodine, if you've ever drank iodine, it makes a burn in the back of your throat like whiskey does. They added embalming fluid. It added that kick that you get when you drink whiskey. The toxic brews were called Undertaker's Highballs or Graveyard Gin, because you can die from that stuff. So they repealed Prohibition in 1933. FDR was president, and of course we were in the middle of the Great Depression, and he didn't want to deal with this. We were spending money on it. Nobody wanted it. In order to do this, because it was the 18th Amendment, they had to have another amendment to negate it, and that's the 21st Amendment. So each state had a popular vote whether you would want the 21st Amendment or not. And so Iowa voted yes on the 21st Amendment. Beer then was the only thing that was legal in bars. You could not buy hard whiskey or hard alcohol in bars. You could only buy beer, supposedly. Not really. You just had to know who to ask because they were still selling illegal whiskey in bars. If you wanted to buy hard alcohol after Prohibition, you had to go to the state-run liquor stores. People are like, yeah, I remember those things. People were really mad about those liquor stores because Iowa had just got, how many years did Iowa say, liquor's bad and we should get rid of it. Now we're selling it and we're making the money off of it. And people were mad about that. In 1963, the Iowa legislature changed the law for the last time, and that's when you could buy liquor by the glass in the bars. We didn't get rid of those state-run liquor stores until what, the late 70s, early 80s? Yeah. There definitely was an impact to Prohibition. The Wets were completely right on all of this. There was a rise in crime. There was more job absenteeism with Prohibition than before Prohibition. There was a rise in car accidents, a widespread disrespect for the law, a lot of alcohol-related deaths. We, as the United States, lost $11 billion in revenue, and we spent over $300 million enforcing a law that nobody wanted. So, two products. The cocktail came out of Prohibition because the alcohol was so awful to drink at times that they kept adding things to it to try and make it drinkable. I'm sure you're aware that NASCAR came out of Prohibition. The rum runners would race their cars. Now that came out of what, North Carolina? You can't tell me that those Iowa boys weren't running their cars on those back roads to see who was faster. So Prohibition today, bootlegging today is still alive and well. If you didn't know that there's bootleg whiskey all over this state, then you're not into whiskey. Because I would assume there's somebody in Spencer who makes bootleg whiskey. You can find it if you know who to ask. But you gotta know a guy who knows a guy who knows the guy. You're never gonna buy it from the bootlegger himself because it is quite illegal. because they haven't paid their state taxes, they don't have, they haven't paid all the dues to the state. So I was in eastern Iowa, and I was just talking about the fact that there's still a lot of bootleg liquor out there, and this guy came up to me after the program, and he said, oh yeah, he said, I can vouch for that. His job is to go to farms and do land valuations, and he walks the land. Mm-hmm. He said, I run into working stills constantly. He said, at first it surprised me, and now I'm like, yep, another still. There is a gentleman, I use that term loosely, there is a gentleman in Carroll who works with Iowa Legendary Rye. They call him Whiskey Rich. He is a 5th generation bootlegger. And I am told that he does not bootleg whiskey anymore. Knowing this guy, I don't even know if I believe that, but. So I sat down with him and I was asking him about the bootleg whiskey that's in Iowa today. And he said, as much as you think there is, he goes, there's way more than that. He said, people have no idea how much bootleg whiskey is in this state. And then he said to me, you know, he said the state of Iowa cares more about bootleg whiskey than they do about illegal marijuana. Because of the taxes and the money they get off of whiskey. They will totally, you can make whiskey for yourself, a certain amount of it, but you cannot sell it. Once you sell it, now you're illegal. Just like you can make beer for yourself, but you can't sell it.
But you can have a cover charge.
You can have a cover charge? Good to know.
That's Eastern Iowa.
I hear Steve the Blind Pig coming. Why do people drink bootleg whiskey? Well, one is the novelty of it. It's kind of cool. Some people think it's kind of cool. 2 is the flavor. Some people prefer bootleg whiskey over other whiskeys. And 3 is the cost. It's cheaper. You are not paying those taxes on that whiskey. So how this works, if you want to know, is that you got your guy and you pay your guy. And then eventually the whiskey shows up maybe on your front porch, in the back of your pickup, and it'll be some kind of like Jack Daniel's bottle, something like that. And you always know it's bootleg because it's got duct tape around the top of it to keep the cork in. So people will say, have duct tape on it? You're like, yep. They're like, aha, I know what this is. If you don't know a guy, you're never going to find a guy. Because they're not going to tell you who does this. They're afraid of getting caught. So I have a website. I have an events button on there so you can see today I'm here at Spencer with you fine people. You can buy books off of my website. I have a blog on my website because all kinds of things happen to me when I'm out and about. I was at Barnes & Noble, I don't know, not this last year, but the year before. My first time at Barnes & Noble. And you can imagine as an author, being in Barnes & Noble selling your book has got to be the highlight, the dream. So I'm sitting there, and nobody really is coming in, and this mall walker guy comes in, and he starts talking to me. And he's standing there talking to me. And I'm thinking to myself, I need to get set up. Plus, I don't, people are starting to come through. And then he started talking about being divorced. And I'm like, I know what he wants. He wants to ask me out for coffee. And I was furious with him. Like, not now! I'm at Barnes & Noble! The dream! Go away! So that's on my blog as well. This is the third in the series, Wayward Son. It takes place in my hometown of Denison. It's one of the last stories that my mom had for the Olson family. And so that's hopefully coming out next fall. We don't have exact dates in the publishing world. It's sort of a maybe fall, maybe winter. So anyway. Couple of things. One, I did bring books with me. So all 3 of my books, I have paperback for $19.95 plus tax, because we're going to pay the tax man. And then the hard copies are $28.95 plus tax. If you want to be on my list of being told when books come out, I send emails out to people who say, yeah, I want to know when your stuff comes out. Otherwise, you can always go to my website, so you can sign up for that. When you buy the Moonshine book, it comes with a parting gift. Because I am paired with the second distillery. Okay, so while you're asking me questions, we're going to do the third whiskey.
Yeah.
Yes, sir?
Did you know there was bootlegging beer in the 1970s?
No, I didn't. Didn't surprise me.
Yes, because we went to Westmore College, and it was against the law to sell Coors beer in Iowa. And so people were bringing Coors beer in Iowa, which was bootlegging. Maybe.
Interesting. What else? As I'm pouring, tell me about what other questions do you have?
Did your bottle duct tape on the top of it?
There's no label on this. I don't exactly know where it was made. That's all I want to say about that. Okay, down this row. Go. Okay, you're welcome. Very good.
That was wonderful.
Oh, thanks. Thanks.
Thank you, this is wonderful.
Here we go.
How about if I come over this way for the back row and then you get to climb?
One more on this one, and then I'll get yours.
Here, I'll open the, go to the book.
Thank you.
Front row.
My grandparents.
Good, I guess.
Well, oh, sorry. Yeah. Well, what'd you think of the last one? Did you like it? Does it?
You like that one? Yes.
Any other questions? Yes. I don't know. Right. Sure. Well, you know why? Because you have to bring your own bottles. Any other questions? Well, I am now done with my presentation. I would remind you to put your receptacles in the trash so that you do not have to. I always told my students, police your area. I'm not your mother. I'm not picking up after you. So thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate it.